Can I get everybody to sit down, please, and quiet down? So for those of you that may not know me, my name is Michael. They're laughing. I'm sure there are people that here that don't know me. I'm the chair of the Rabbi Search Committee at Temple Beth Tikvah. It's my pleasure to welcome you this morning for the opportunity to meet our guests, Rabbi Mark Klein and his wife, Lori. Before we begin, I'd like to take a minute to recognize the other members of the search committee. When I say your name, please stand up. Kevin Applebaum, Evelyn Bell and Mike Bell, who are not here today. They're in Italy, but they're on Zoom, I understand. Phyllis Berkeley, Barbara Levine, who's our secretary. Barbara here yet? She's sick, okay. Sarah Nijat Bina, who's our co-chair. Marty Schwartzman, Mitch Shapiro, Ronnie Henderson, our temple president, Lynette Northcutt, who couldn't be with us today. And the committee has two advisors, past presidents of TBT, Mitch Goldberg and Greg Weitzman. Since January, this group has put in countless hours on the task of finding a rabbi to replace the irreplaceable Rabbi Nico Sokolovsky. This is a sacred task. I want the congregation to know that this group has taken that task very seriously. I ask that you show them your appreciation at this time. Rabbi Klein is here today for what we call a second interview. His first interview with the search committee was on May 2 by way of Zoom from his home in New Jersey. He's here today for a more in-depth meeting with us. This meeting with the congregation will begin with Rabbi Klein making some remarks. We will then open the floor to questions from the congregation. We have 2 microphones available for you to use to ask questions of the rabbi. Simply raise your hand and Phyllis or Marvin will bring the microphone to you. Before asking your question, please tell the rabbi your name. Then please speak clearly into the mic and ask your question. Please, only one question per person. We know you may have lots of questions for the rabbi, but we want as many people as possible to have the chance to ask at least one question. If time allows, we'll get back to you for a second question. Also, please keep your questions short and to the point. Again, we want as many people as possible to have time to talk to the rabbi. For the children here today, oh, I see one over there. I know that child. Don't be shy. The rabbi wants to answer your questions too. For those viewing this on Zoom, use the Zoom chat function to send us your questions. Marty Schwartzman will monitor the chat and get your questions to the rabbi. We have refreshments in the social hall, pastries, regular and gluten-free, fruit and liquid refreshments, non-alcoholic. Help yourself at any time. We are on a very tight schedule today. We've packed a lot into the rabbi's day. We're going to end this meeting promptly at 12:30 p.m. The rabbi has another meeting to go to immediately after this one. So don't think he's being rude when we whisk him away at 12:30. And I hope, as you know, there's a second opportunity to hear from the rabbi today at 2:30 p.m. when he will be making a 1-hour Zoom presentation. The link for that presentation is the same link as the link used for this one. Finally, the search committee would like your feedback. To do that, send an email to the temple at the regular email address, info@tbtoc.org. With that, let's give a warm Temple Beth Tikvah welcome to Rabbi Mark Klein.
Wow. First of all, thank you for having me here. I have thoroughly enjoyed my conversations with the search committee. I've done some research on the area. My grandmother was in Anaheim, so I grew up in Disneyland. And I was one of the fortunate ones because my Uncle Manny he worked at GE. And so I had one of those passes that y'all will remember A, B, C, D, and E tickets. We didn't have to worry about wasting the A or B tickets because we had all E-ticket rides the whole time. So wonderful. So I'm Mark Klein, and I'd like to start by telling you I'm a recovering lawyer. But that time and I guess those experiences have really helped form who I am as rabbi. When I went back to my 40th high school reunion in Las Vegas where I grew up, well, actually, sorry guys, we don't really grow up. I matriculated from high school, okay? My wife tells me that boys don't ever really grow up. We get older, we lose hair, and we have more expensive toys, right? So, but that said, when I went back to my 44th high school reunion, when people saw the word rabbi in front of my name, the laughter was just off the charts. I was probably voted least likely to have a spiritual bone in my body in my senior year of high school. Why? Well, in part, I grew up in a conservadox home, and Seder lasted until Dad was hungry, and we skipped the next 40 pages. He thought he was fooling us at Seder when it came time for the Kos Eliyahu, the cup of Elijah. The lights would go off, and every year the lights would go back on and the cup was empty until precocious Mark caught him drinking the cup when the lights were off. That was my Jewish upbringing. So the day after my bar mitzvah ceremony, the rabbi called me into his office, Rabbi Philip Schneerson. I'll never forget, I was probably his first bar mitzvah in Las Vegas. He had come to us from Philadelphia. And he sat me down and he looked at me and he said, "You don't belong here." Now, I was perfectly happy to hear that news, okay? You and I don't see God the same way and you don't understand. You probably don't need to come back. And so joyfully, I walked away and realized many years later, I cheated myself, or he cheated me out of, however that works, a lot of years of valuable involvement in Jewish community, in growth, in spirit, and in the whole shooting match. So that said, I went to college in New Orleans at Tulane. I went to law school in Arkansas, University of Arkansas, Little Rock. When I got to Little Rock, I decided that I probably needed to go to the synagogue to meet a Jewish girl because my parents would have wanted that. My first night there, the rabbi introduced me to his daughter, and I said, "No, this is just too much, too fast," and I walked away again. So it happens that I was working on the last vestiges of Brown versus the Board of Education as it applied to the Little Rock School District, and one of the lawyers I was working with, Laser Palnick, his dad was the Reform rabbi in Little Rock. And Laser and I became very close, and I became very close with the family. And so I started attending Friday night services because there was food afterwards, and because I enjoyed the conversation with Zeke Palnick, the rabbi. It was very foreign to me. First of all, there was an organ. what little I remembered, musical instruments didn't exist, and it was a woman singing. And that was, so I was there for the food and for the conversation. And somewhere, well, actually the night of my last law school final, I went into the library and I threw my book bag down next to a woman I had met once. And I said, if you're here when I get done, we're going to dinner. Romantic, I get it, okay? By the way, that was Pearl Harbor Day, because I did law school in 2.5 years. So we did, and over the course of time, Cindy started coming to services with me on Friday night, because she was Methodist, by the way, and she knew that if she wanted to hang out with me on a Friday night, we went to temple first, listened to the conversation, had dessert, and then did whatever we were going to do. We decided to get married, which to me meant paying for a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, and that was my upbringing. And then one day the rabbi called me, Rabbi Palnick, and said that I needed to start attending his Intro to Judaism classes. And I said, why? I'm Jewish. And he said, well, I know, but your fiancée is now attending my classes, and she knows more than you do. And he was right. So that was my path back to Judaism. As it turned out, I've always coached Little League kids. I love working with kids all my life. And so when Zeke moved away, there were 2 young men who needed bar mitzvah training. And while I couldn't read Hebrew, I remembered the prayers by rote because they'd been drilled into my head when I was young. And so you don't forget some things. So I started tutoring these 2 young men. And when Gene Levy showed up, Rabbi Levy, who I really call my rabbi and dear friend, he assumed that I'd been doing all of the bar and bat mitzvah instruction in all of Central Arkansas. And so every student came to my dining room table Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday nights, one after another. And that really is when I decided that I really loved what I was doing and needed to get more involved. So when the Reform movement created its first rabbinic, what they called then the Rabbinic Aid Program that was housed at Kutz Camp in Warwick, New York, Rabbi Levy sent me and said, you know, you're doing so much at the synagogue, why don't you formally learn how to help me out? And I did. And there I met several second career rabbis. And I realized that what I was doing at the synagogue, I really loved doing. What I was doing in the practice of law, I had 2 lawyers that worked for me and an accountant that worked for me. I represented Century 21 and Baskin-Robbins in Central Arkansas, and then also the ACLU. Go figure, corporate and ACLU, you know. But it was in the middle of Whitewater, what we now know is Whitewater. We didn't know it was Whitewater at the time, just the Rose Law Firm was just horrifically abusive, and I hated going to practice every day, just because I knew I was going to have to deal with one of their lawyers. So as I'm sitting in the sanctuary at Kutz Camp, and I'm overlooking the lake, it hit me that this is what I wanted to do. So I called Cindy and I said, this is what I want to do. And she said, when do we move? Closed my law office and we moved to Israel in time for the Gulf War. I'm telling you, you know, there's so many asterisks after this, you know. Came home early, went to Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, and I've never looked back. I retired my law license and love what I've been able to do since. And I've done it in communities that I've been blessed to serve. I've needed really unique work, and I'll deal with that in just a moment. And it was 14 years ago that Cindy died. My youngest at that point was 8. And I wasn't really sure what my next steps were. I was standing over Cindy's grave, and I said, I have to make a choice. I can crawl in this hole and grieve the years that I didn't get and the plight that I find myself in, or I could be thankful for the 23 years that no one guaranteed me. And it hit me that the only reasonable answer is to be thankful for the blessings that I've been able to have and not dwell on what wasn't. You know, we're not guaranteed a day with anybody in our life. And so everyone truly is a gift. And the true next gift came when I decided to go out onto JDate to find out what it meant to be a 48-year-old widowed rabbi with children. I knew I would date at some point, right? Well, the beauty of JDate is that they send you profile matches. They don't wait for you to find someone. And so I get this profile from Lori Bernard, and it says that she's in Cincinnati. Well, I went to school in Cincinnati. She's at Temple Shalom. Well, I did all of the adult education at Temple Shalom. I taught in the religious school at Temple Shalom. My kids went to religious school at Temple Shalom. And so, she was on the board there, and she taught in the religious school, so it became really clear that we probably have known each other, but have no recognition of that time, no remembrances. So I wrote back because it said unwilling to relocate. And the lawyer in me kicked in. Now, does that mean geographically or chronologically, like I'm not willing to relocate for a couple of years, or I am not leaving this area, period? So we start talking, and it became really evident clearly that while we don't remember anything about each other, our kids were in religious school together. We were at faculty meetings together. We were at events where there are stories to tell about the visual. So it's as if I'm there and she's there and have no memory. And so that was one of the first times that I really understood Albert Einstein's words, coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. So I'm not a fatalist, but there's more to it than just it happened, okay? And I have been blessed. We married in 2010, and Lori really didn't raise Rachel as a stepmom, but has taken care of my baby as her baby. And our baby graduated from college just a couple weeks ago. So thank you. So if you meet me, I'm going to tell you ask how I am, I'm going to tell you I'm blessed every day. And when I moved up north, they said, really? But it's true. I'm blessed every day. I've known my share of tsuris. I've buried a brother. I found out my father was dead 5 weeks after he was buried. I've got all of this stuff, but I'm telling you that every day is an absolute gift and an opportunity to change the world, some small piece of it, to grow who we are and who we can be, and to create relationships that may seem serendipitous at the beginning, but end up lasting a lifetime. So my pathway to Rabbi isn't normal. I never dreamt of doing this, and I'll be candid right up front in saying that I think that sometimes in our tradition we put so much emphasis on the dotting of the I's and the crossing of the T's that we forget the value of faith in the mix. And I look at a rabbinic tradition that has evolved over thousands of years, and then somewhere it got stuck in, no, this is the way we do it. And so when I see communities that don't mind experimenting, where there's a variety of opportunities to celebrate holidays, to celebrate Shabbat, to create opportunities to celebrate, that's really kind of cool. It's what I want for the rest of my career. So I went to Florence, South Carolina, right out of rabbinical school, in part because then 5-year-old Lexi Falk, who is now the mother of 2, looked up at me and said, will you be our fun rabbi? But the real reason, the rabbi that had been there had created all sorts of problems, and it turned out that my first Kol Nidre as an ordained rabbi, I walked out of my office, and I was met with a process server, and we were being sued for wrongful death. I didn't know it was that bad. I knew it was a problem. But 8 years, and we resolved that, and we grew the community in Florence. And then I knew at that point that my kids needed something more than Florence, South Carolina. And Lexington, Kentucky came calling. They had an abusive rabbi who was there 14 years, trying to leave for 9, but couldn't get a job anywhere else. And his posse kept him there. Well, I went there to fix the system and to regrow the community. 2 years into it, he leads a coup attempt against me to get rid of me. We survived that, and we grew the congregation from 270 to 370 families in Lexington, Kentucky. And then, where I'm serving now, Rabbi Sally Prezant, the first woman ordained rabbi in America, served there for 25 years. In fact, just yesterday at ordination, she celebrated her 50th anniversary of ordination. Broke ceilings, amazing, amazing woman. But when she retired, she never let go of the congregation, and they didn't know how to let go of her. In 6 years, they went through 3 rabbis. I got called, and I said, okay. So they had a revolving door of rabbis and educators and systems there that needed renewing. And so I accepted that challenge because I do this on the side as a consultant. But this was the opportunity to prove, is it a 3-day gig and I go back home? Or do I really know what I'm doing? And for 8 years, I've been blessed to serve. And we're at a place now where there's, I think I've done everything that I can. So now Lori and I are, if I may, please excuse the expression, you will find that I'm very colloquial in so many ways. We had our Come to Jesus meeting. And so we had to decide, what is it that we want for the rest of our career? I had planned on retiring in New Jersey. Lori had planned on retiring. She is a clinical research coordinator for the largest hospital system in the state. And man plans and God laughs. And so we decided that I don't want to beat my head against the wall. I want to find a community where I can serve, where I can use the skills, talents, and love I have for a tradition with a community that doesn't need a reclamation rabbi, that needs to be loved and to continue to grow. And so even while we've made this decision late in the game, I said, I can take a year off and wait until placement starts again next year, or we can see what's out there. And I found a couple of communities that just want to create that loving long-term relationship, to grow the community and to celebrate growing commitment to Torah, to Judaism in the broader community context. And so that's what brings me here with you today. And I am blessed the search committee feels that I can play that role here. So with that, I don't think I have forgotten anything material, and if I did, I hope you'll get to know me over time. As Michael said, I'm going to be whisked from room to room today. I know that. I knew that coming in. But I hope if people have stories to share, I mean, you all have been here, many of you, I'm told, for many years. And there are things that you want to share about your time here, either things that you've cherished along the way that you don't want to have put at risk, things that you've been concerned about that you want to see addressed in some way, or just wanting to make sure that the love that you have shared here continues to be relevant as we're moving forward. And I would love to have those conversations. If not today, my commitment is please contact me privately. I don't know that technically that's within the rules, but I do a lot of training and leadership training with organizations, and one of the Bibles I use is entitled, "The First Thing You Do Is Break All the Rules." So, so I'm, again, far more about the substance over the form. So whether it's legit or not, if you have questions or you have concerns, I would invite that communication, and I'll do the best I can to respond timely. I'm very approachable. I do believe that I don't want to ever be on a pedestal. I'm usually in jeans with a shirt and tie and a ball cap. And Ohio State, because that's where my daughters go, okay? Lori's daughter graduated from Ohio State and then went to veterinarian school and graduated, so there's that. And then our Rachel just graduated and is going actually for her master's. So right now, it's Ohio State. Now, it's easy because I'm not picking local teams, okay? That said, I grew up as a Green Bay Packer fan because my brother, my late brother and I watched the Ice Bowl together in 1967. Bart Starr goes over, Jerry Kramer to score. And from that point, David and I, lifelong Packer fans. In fact, I guess 2 years before he passed, we both became shareholders together. So I'm now one of 6 million, I think I own a paperclip. So that's that piece. But I always want to make sure that service is not from a distance. If I can't have intimate relationships with people, then I'm not doing what I want. When I moved to New Jersey, I had an opportunity to go to Rochester, New York, to an 1,100 family congregation. And I didn't want to be the CEO. I've never used a congregation as a stepping stone. I love the people with whom I've been involved, engaged. I guess it was 4 years, the year before COVID, Lori, we went to Israel. I took a trip to Israel, and I had members of all 3 of my congregations on that trip. because I believe in maintaining relationships because that's what's sacred in the work that we do. So with that, I'd love to open it up to questions. Anything is fair game, okay?
You haven't truly introduced your wife, and if you would, please.
I would
have
love
her-
to. Lori Bernard, please stand up. When I tell you that I am blessed every day, and I said this earlier, but when Lori waltzed into my life, it was somewhat of a whirlwind in many ways. We had children going everywhere, and it's been just really an incredible journey with someone who probably may actually be more religious in her practice than I am, which has really been interesting as we've moved forward in life, okay? So thank you.
I'll start. I'm Miriam Van Ralt.
Miriam.
I was ordained in 2020 as a rabbi through the Jewish Spiritual Leaders Institute.
Okay.
And since that time, I've been working alongside our other clergy as an engagement fellow. I watched a couple of your sermons, your Divrei Torah, and it appears to me that most rabbis have an umbrella message, their own Torah that they speak and weave into their rabbinate. I was wondering, I think I detected what it is, but I was wondering if you would speak to what your Torah is for our congregation.
I appreciate that, and I do. I come with an agenda that is all about returning to human. When we look at, and this I'm going to speak to this actually in my Devar Torah a little bit more, later this afternoon, but when we look at the origins of tradition, Torah, the Mechilta Rabbi Ishmael 2,000 years ago, rabbis teach that Torah was given in Sinai, a place owned by nobody, and it says, including Israel, so that nobody, including Israel, can claim exclusive ownership. So when I start with, it's all of ours. Even the late Rabbi, Menachem Schneerson, said this in his book published posthumously, Towards a Meaningful Life, that Torah is the possession of the world. And so we have an obligation, if we really believe in Tikkun Olam, which is part of the banner that we walk with here, that it's the whole Olam, not the Jewish Olam. And the dignity that we have to provide for everybody with whom we come in contact, the way that we have to share and learn with everybody is really our sacred task. The Talmud says, Dina de Malchuta Dina, the law of the land you live in is the law you live by, which means being a good citizen is primary to who we are. And so I've always made it a point, and I've been blessed to have the relationships that have allowed me to be involved in a much broader context. Last Sunday, I helped ordain a Black Baptist minister in a Baptist church. I serve on a refugee education board that's sanctioned by the Vatican. I serve as a member of the board of Muslims for Peace, and 2 Zionist boards as well, and a board of Palestinian empowerment. And so I really believe that everything I do is geared at how do people see each other from a standpoint of human faith. And I think sometimes our religious dogma gets in the way of being faithful. So you will hear from me over and over again that we have to be aware of each other, that prayer is the thing, isn't the words that we read. Prayer is how we take those words and apply it to the work we do in the broader world. And we're successful as a Jewish community if we build bridges around the world. And it works for us because if we're part of the community conversation, then we're part of the community conversation. It doesn't happen around us or about us. And at the same time, we have the opportunity to mold a bigger future. So that's where I am, and it's if that's what you've perceived, that's what I do, and that's where my success has been. So, thank you. Yes, sir. Oh, actually, you're not next. I don't control this, Jonathan. I'm sorry.
Hi. Sorry. I'm Terry Applebaum. I am the current VP of Education. I don't know how much you know about our education program. We have an ECLC, we have our Wednesday Alpon Hebrew class with our confirmation class also meeting on Wednesdays, and then Saturday we have our Havayah religious school program.
And Gesher, the after school.
And yes, thank you so much. See, you know more than what I'm even saying. Thank you so much. Yes, we have our Gesher, and that is so wonderful because we actually go and pick up children at their schools and bring them here. So we are definitely open to change and revision and growth. I'm wondering, is there something that you feel that you can bring to our education program or something that you enjoy doing with the children through education?
The first part is really a challenging question because not being on the ground here, for me to come in and say, okay, we're going to do things differently, folks, would be suicide for my career and devastating for any community. Okay? So I can't tell you what needs to change. What I'm seeing is I see the pictures of kids enjoying themselves. I see the testimonies of people who have appreciated what happens here. So I'll change your question just a little bit to what I think a Jewish curriculum should involve. And I think it's, when we teach our kids, we need to teach value from a value-based curriculum. Just for Hebrew, fourth graders don't know what prayer is, period. And then we throw foreign language at them. And you've got to memorize these words because this is prayer. And then we wonder why there's this disconnect when after bar or bat mitzvah, they say, well, I never really understood what I was doing or saying, but I did a great job of it and there was a party afterwards. So I want to take some of the bar out of bar mitzvah, okay? And put some of the mitzvah back in. So one of the things that we did was we got rid of early Hebrew textbooks, and we created packages for teaching prayers. And just for one example with Baruch Hu, yes, the decoding and the learning of the letters, but learning what it meant to praise, understanding why it would be something you would begin a service with. But then for the kids, especially using social media, one of the tasks was create the Instagram page for the Baruch Hu prayer. So if Baruch Hu was to create its own Instagram page, what would that look like and what would it involve? And at that point, our kids really start to internalize all of the concepts that are tied into that piece. Holidays are a lot more than they attacked us, we won, let's eat, right? And yet, we have devolved our Jewish holidays to be kid-friendly, forgetting that there's some very adult pieces to this. You know, how many of you have ever read the last couple chapters of Esther? It's horrific. We stop the book when normally with, and Haman dies, and there's this great party, and we all live happily ever after. But the rest of the book, and then Mordecai ends up slaughtering 70,000 Persians, and Persians are converting to Judaism out of fear of Mordecai. You don't get this stuff, but it's in the book. And there's some incredibly important lessons to learn from that, especially when you read that the rabbis say that when the Messianic age comes, you can get rid of the entire Tanakh except for the book of Esther. Some say the Torah and the book of Esther, but you can get rid of the entire Tanakh except the book of Esther, which never mentions God, but which tells us that the Messianic age isn't something that happens because we won the war, and if we ever stop being vigilant for being peaceful, we might lose it. So it's not a one and done. And so we got a lot of work to do. Tikkun olam, making sure our kids understand you don't show up to do things because the rabbi said show up to do it, that there's an intrinsic reason for showing up. And one of the great lessons I've learned from a Baptist minister friend of mine, Eric Dobson, his dad was a Baptist minister, and one day Eric said when he was a teenager, I don't want to go to Christmas Mass. And Dad said, great, go volunteer somewhere today. You don't have to go to church, go volunteer. So we went to the soup kitchen, and he spent all day, worked very hard, helped clean up, and at the end, he says to everybody, this was a great day, I'll see you next year. And they looked at him and said, next year? We're here tomorrow. You know, this stuff, because the need isn't when it's convenient for us to show up. There's need. And we read in Deuteronomy, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice, you will pursue it. Well, what does it mean to pursue it as opposed to wait for it to happen? So I want our kids to understand the value of their Judaism in the world, not just the label of Judaism. And I don't want I don't want any of us to believe that, okay, I'm Jewish when I come to temple, and then I go back into my life. And so if I'm involved in sports or in dance or in other meetings, what are the rules of engagement? How do I take care of my team? How do I work on making sure that I'm relevant? And how do I take care of honoring my opponent? If we can teach our kids that coming through our religious school, we have changed the world. Okay? Now, Jonathan, it's your turn.
Thank you. I have to stand up. Sorry. Jonathan Goldman. I am a parent of Noah with the sticker stuck to his face. And Eliana there in the back, son-in-law of Michael, who you know. So my question is mainly about the kids. Son-in-law to Mickey. I'm sorry. We're a Jewish family.
Good training.
Yeah.
Good training.
So there's two other young men here today, Lincoln and Gunnar, who are belong to Patty and Rebecca, and they're out and about. But I asked the kids a little earlier if they had a question, what would their question be? Because they get shy. And we talked a little bit through some ideas about what they like to do here and what they love about TBT. And one of the questions was, I have a friend who sometimes says they don't want to be Jewish, or they know some other kids that don't really strongly identify. Can you give us a specific example of a time where you worked with a student or a group of students on the goal of helping them love being Jewish more? And the reason why this came about in my mind is because I was talking with Rabbi Nico yesterday, and we were talking about the camps that we went to when we were kids. Mm-hmm. And specifically the camp that I went to, when I came home from that 3 weeks, I loved being Jewish more. And I can't point to a specific thing, it happened while I was there. Maybe it was just all things put together. But that was the question that we came up with. Can you tell us about a specific incident with a student or a group of students, kids, where the outcome was these kids learned more about what it meant to be Jewish and more about loving being Jewish?
Appreciate that, Jonathan. And I guess this is a great segue, Terry, from your question. Kids will never remember one day's lesson plan from religious school. They'll remember engagement. They'll remember engagement with each other, with their teachers, and with their clergy. And I'm very hands-on with our kids. And in the communities I've served, they're my kids, and they all know it. Last Sunday, I had to say goodbye to our religious school. We got 120 kids, and there were a lot of tears, not just mine. Every one of those kids knows that I care about what they're doing. I will sit and read with the preschool kids. I have played Duck, Duck, Goose with the kindergarten. I understand 6th and 7th graders because their world is in turmoil. Their hormones are changing, the body is changing, and when you're little, you can be involved in all sorts of things. But as you start getting older, if you don't focus your energy on one thing, then you don't get to play. When I grew up, you could be a 3-sport letter person, not a problem. That doesn't happen anymore, because if you're not playing that sport, it's okay. Kids talk. So if you're not doing that one thing all year, you don't play. So I teach 6th and 7th grade in our religious school because I want to be part of their organized chaos. And it works really well, and I love it. So I say that the best answer is when kids have come to me and said, I don't believe in God, or I don't want to be Jewish, there's a real conversation, and it's not a old person to kid. When I start with every bar and bat mitzvah child, the first lesson I say, today you become my rabbi. And they look at me and I say, I've got all these years of experience and all this, what have you got to teach me? And inevitably they get down to the point of, you have no idea how to talk to a 12-year-old unless I teach you. And I take that as sacred work. And so we start from the concept that it's our conversation. So when kids come to me with challenges, And I can't point to one, I can point to about hundreds. I've got one, well, I will, this one a couple weeks ago, which was really somewhat traumatic. I have someone who grew up as a biologic young lady who decided that they were not sure. Understanding they is no longer a plural noun, okay? They were not sure what they were. And the idea of bat mitzvah, a binary term, was really problematic. And because they had been forced to live all their lives under this identity, wasn't sure that this was religion at all, never mind just Judaism, was the place to be. Being affirmed, first of all, was huge in that. Being able to say that God's never tapped me on the shoulder. I have no idea what God is. I know God is, but I can't define God. And by the way, Maimonides says to try to define God is blasphemy. If it's good enough for Maimonides, it's good enough for me. And in that conversation, an understanding changed. Well, why would people do things? Well, people may do things, but that's not what our tradition. And our job, there and my job, is to help people learn that Torah requires us to dignify people even outside of our frames of reference. So one of the main reasons the kids say, I'm not sure about my identity, is because it's not fashionable, or it's not cool, or they've heard anti-Jewish stuff, or they don't believe in some of the things, or don't want to be in religious school because it impedes on other things. And we've got to make the whole process engaging to them. I have students this year who've chosen religious school over soccer, which is really kind of amazing. And not over soccer completely, but the coach knows that on Wednesday, because we still have a 2-day-a-week school, on Wednesdays I'm going to be at Temple. Or if I have, if there's issues where your religious school education conflicts with a football game or a soccer game, I have kids that come for half an hour or an hour of the two in uniform, and then go and know that no one's looking at them askant because they cut out an hour early. They were there. So the greatest obstacles that we have to overcome in helping our youth, and I would say this applies to our adults as well, and I'm not sure who I am, is to dignify and acknowledge who he, she, they are, and then let them know that that's also Jewish. Elu ve'elu, divrei Elohim chaim. These words and these words are both God's words. And so there's no one way to do Jewish. And so many people choose not or think they're not real because they don't fit into that identity that someone else has carved out for them. And that's not what it's about. If the Maccabees won the battle, and it's a blessing that they lost the war. If they had really kicked all of Greek culture out to establish their way of doing Judaism, we would never have had an Einstein. We could not have had any of the people that we celebrate who are Jews who have changed the world. Because the Maccabees, the Hasmoneans, were about the altar and the altar only. Nothing Greek, no Greek culture. And so any philosophy, the sciences, any of the things that we celebrate wouldn't be part of our tradition. So there is no one way to do this. Long answer, and I apologize, but that's really one of the things that plague communities the greatest is so many people don't affiliate because they don't know that I really belong there. It's not what I thought it was, or they don't understand me there. And so as a community, we change that dialogue and we create very different conversations for everybody. And by the way, the young adult that I was just speaking of earlier, on the day that, last Sunday, they came into my office right after religious school and asked if I could come back for the bat mitzvah, which I can't. But that's when you know that acknowledging and dignifying someone is the right answer in every case. So. It's going to be a long day. I'm good. I appreciate it, though. Thank you.
I can hold it.
I get 15,000 steps a day, and I'm not getting them today, so this is good.
Hello, Rabbi. I'm Fran Sherman. My husband Steve is here with me. I'm delighted that we're able to come today so that we have the pleasure of meeting you and hearing you.
Appreciate the pleasure piece.
Yeah, okay, I'm glad you do. So I have a two-part question. What is your perspective on intermarriage and same-sex marriage?
Love is a family value. I just got cut. Okay, now I'm good. All right. I was wondering if I was about to be censored. No. I'm going to have to rewrite my drosh for this afternoon. If we go back to Genesis 1, the first humanoid created in Genesis chapter 1 is androgynous, right? Then you get to Adam. And how is Eve created? Eve is pulled from Adam, which means Adam was created both genders. And not all, only the rib was taken, so we're not even under the presumption that once that rib was taken, oh, thank you, I've got my bottle, but this is closer. We're not under the presumption that everything female was taken from Adam, only the rib. So that the idea we used to say XX, XY, we know scientifically isn't true anymore. There's lots of X's and Y's in the DNA chain. So biologically, just from a biologic standpoint, I'm not sure that there was really ever a true binary system. I think we've applied one. So when I look at the hate that exists in this world, and I look at the love that two people want to share, the second one speaks a whole lot louder to me than anything of the first. Aside from the fact that I don't see anything in the Bible that speaks really against homosexuality. You can read literally, but rabbis teach us that reading literally isn't part of the Jewish tradition. So it's an allegory. It's all allegorical. And if you point to one line and say, I'm going to pull this one out, you run risk of really destroying the rest of the rabbinic system. So 5 years ago, when the United Methodist Church nationally held its debate on gay clergy and gay marriage, and you can check this, I'm the one that spawned that debate. Reverend Gill Caldwell was one of Dr. King's lieutenants. And Gill and I got thrown together because we were at justice meetings together speaking, and Gill became one of my dearest friends, passed away now several years ago. He broke the race barrier in the United Methodist Church, becoming the first black district Methodist minister. And then he dedicated his career as a lifetime member of the PFLAG board, Parents and Friends, Gay and Lesbians, which for black ministers alienated him from many of his colleagues. But he said that if it's important that we end discrimination on race, then we need to end discrimination. And he dedicated his life to that work. Well, he says to me, the last thing that I need to have done before I die is to break the anti-gay barrier in the Methodist Church. And so he asked me to write, and I did, and it was published in the National United Methodist Insight, and you can find it by Googling Rabbi Mark Klein and homosexuality, and the article is there. And that article spawned a debate within the bishops, and then within the convention itself. And at the convention, they said no, but there's been all sorts of machinations, and all that's to say is, I believe that when we use the Bible to condemn homosexuality, we misrepresent God and we misrepresent the Bible. I have never had a problem performing same-sex marriages except when they legally weren't allowed, because I couldn't do the marriage, but I could do commitment ceremonies, etc. My first year of rabbinical school was the first year that Hebrew Union College admitted openly homosexual students, 3 of them. One who's actually a member of my congregation. She's a now retired hospice rabbi. And so that's pretty clear, my stance. In terms of interfaith, well, I don't like using the term interfaith. There's one God. There's faith. And it plays out in different religions across the board. We send our kids out to engage the world, and what happens when we do that? They come home engaged to someone in the world, right? And that's reality. And when we think about the values of faith, we're supposed to remember to dignify everybody and to make sure that we appreciate that there's many paths to the same God. Our job in a community is to say, if there's a couple from different religious traditions and they want to investing their lives here, then that's not a special asterisk category. That's part of our family. And by the way, more and more communities are understanding that the future of Judaism in America revolves around the fact that we live in a post-denominational world. People are now less concerned with the label of my religion than what faith in that community can give my family. And I happen to believe, not exclusive of any other tradition, but the Jewish tradition offers a ton of good reasons to understand why Talmud and Torah are so essential to community building and to healing the world. So I need to make sure, if I'm going to preside in such a ceremony, that they want to have Jewish involvement. I don't feel I can co-officiate with non-Jewish clergy, because I don't want a couple to create or take competing vows. One saying, I'm praying my covenant with you in this tradition, and another saying, I'm praying my covenant with you in this tradition on the day that they're supposed to become one. So that's where I am. But that said, 70% of my religious school right now are interreligious families. And because we've made the case that our synagogue wants to make life make sense for their family, we're the exclusive place of worship. We're the exclusive place of belonging. So that's the world in which we face, and Judaism always has to evolve. And if we don't think about what tomorrow's Judaism is going to look like, and by the way, all these kids are being raised as Jewish kids, whatever the split of their parents. And so if we don't think about what tomorrow needs to look like, then we might as well be looking at shutting the doors of synagogues across America, which has happened. And it's not about any one piece of it. By the way, this requires us then to think about what does it mean to truly engage people. So if your service is all in Hebrew, the non-Jewish, never mind the Jews who never learned the Hebrew, okay? All right, but certainly the non-Jewish partner in a family is going to feel absolutely lost in that worship experience. And there's no reason that person wants to come in and spend an hour to sit and twiddle his, her, or their thumbs, not knowing what's going on. So that means that, coming back with some of the English, or actually teaching, God forbid we should teach what the prayers mean, so that people can learn to appreciate and join in. So this changing face of Judaism impacts every part of Jewish life, not just the religious school, and certainly not just the marriage and the wedding. So, Mitch, I don't control this. You're past president. I don't control this, though. Yeah.
Mitch, do you want to come first? Melissa, you want to come first?
Okay, it
Stand up,
doesn't
please.
matter. I'll go quick. I'm Melissa Fisher Goldman, the one he didn't mention in the list of introductions.
Sorry, dude. But I knew about you.
I'm on the board of trustees, and I grew up here. Just to dovetail on some of the things you've been saying in more detail, it looks from your professional resume like the pulpits that you are on, the congregations grow during that time.
Yes.
And that is something I would like to see happen here. So I would love to hear more about how you did that outreach and how you would do it here.
Thank you. The bottom line is engagement, how you engage people. And I'll go back to a piece that you asked Jonathan earlier about people who don't feel that they fit in, or when you engage people, they learn a whole new perspective on who they are and what the potential of their engagement can be. I guess the largest pieces of my success have come from having partners that have been willing to take who we are and take it outside of the building to engage the wider community. And so there are people who are either loosely affiliated with their Jewishness or not, completely secular, who will find, oh, you guys have a garden that gives 4,000 pounds of fresh produce. I can do that. I believe in environmental. I believe in feeding the people. And if your temple's doing that, I want to be part of that temple. They may never set foot in the sanctuary, but they've become instrumental parts of Jewish life in our world. People who have been turned off because of financial issues. And, in all three of my communities, and I'm not, again, suggesting that this is where we start a conversation, but we've gotten rid of dues, and giving has gone up. And people feel that they can be enfranchised in being part of a Jewish community without having to get a bill or having to humiliate themselves by telling someone why I can't meet the minimum that you require. And so I'll just share this with you, and I know I'm already kicking myself for introducing this one, but I use the scenario that someone says, I want to pray with your community. Great, we want you to pray with us. Here's an application. I have to apply to pray with you? Yeah, and the board has to vote, but they've never turned anybody down. The board has to vote on whether I can pray with you or not? Oh, and then there's a fee, dues. I don't know where we ever came up with that term, but anyway, dues. But if you can't make it, it's okay. We've never turned anyone away because of money. If you just can tell us why you can't pay, we'll be happy to let you in for whatever. And if you think about it, even those of us who know that the financial structure is sacred, because we don't get to do anything if our financial structure isn't whole, but when you play that conversation out that way, it just doesn't feel right. Okay? And so, we have to think about how many people are not here, either because of the reality or the perception that it's too expensive to be Jewish. And then you look at what does it cost us to have someone on our rolls? Anybody? Zero. If they're giving $200 a year, that's $200 more than we had, and we have more people power to do more work. And by the way, we have an opportunity to engage them so that when their situation is better, they'll give more. And by the way, we call it investing in the mission as opposed to making sure that the bills are paid. So that's a conversation we can have a long time, and I'm sorry, but you asked the question. I'm trying to answer it as fully and completely as I can, because that's part of the success. Also, when people are floundering in faith from whatever traditions, and they can see the exemplar of a community that does so much and feels so close together and accomplishes, that's where I get most of my conversion students. Not because someone got married to or is marrying a Jewish person, but because people are on a faith journey right now, and they want to be someplace that is meaningful in their lives, and we can provide that. And so in Florence, South Carolina, we grew almost 40 families. In Lexington, we grew over 100 families. We've grown a net almost 60 families where I'm at now, including 40 during COVID when they couldn't come in the sanctuary, but it was because of what we were doing in the wider community that people said, that's a community that's still doing, that's a community that still makes sense, that's a community I want to vest myself in. And by the way, that also meant that our religious school grew 20% this year. So it's about engagement at all of these different levels. Okay.
Okay, so segue further into that commentary that's been going on. My name is Mitchell Goldberg, and over here is my wife, Janice, so I will not ignore her.
You guys are making me feel bad. I mentioned Lori, but I didn't actually introduce her, so now I really feel bad.
Well, that way you get to see how we come together as couples, you see. My question that segues into that is, some of us were raised in a more traditional environment, and we've been very comfortable living within a traditional type of service, a bit of a traditional type of spirituality. How do you blend all this community outreach and still at the same time accommodate those of us, maybe from older generations, who want to hear some of the prayers or ritual in its structure, not necessarily the same tune. Rabbi Nico made sure we learned new tunes, but in a structure so that you can feel that sense of, let's call it kavanah from a spiritual standpoint, along with doing all the other outreach to expand faith. How do you blend it all together?
I've got two answers, which at front are going to seem as if they're divergent, but I'm going to share both, and then I'll bring it together. Harriet Rose, may she rest in peace, Shalom, passed at 102, and she was in Lexington, Kentucky. And every Friday night, she would come up to me and say, I hate this prayer book, which at that point was Gates of Prayer. I hate that you read Torah on Friday nights. I hate this new music. I love that you're doing it because the synagogue that I've spent my entire life growing is thriving, and I look around me and I see Judaism is alive, even while it doesn't necessarily meet my need. Her need was met Saturday mornings at Torah study. So that's answer number one. Answer number two is, and to take a phrase from what may not have been one of the most successful pieces of our American tradition, but in theory works, is no child left behind. Right? Nobody's an obsolete member of a community, which includes the stuff that's sacred. And so there are no wholesale changes that you make. There are changes that you will gradually grow into. And some of those changes don't undo this, they'll create another opportunity. Being able to teach ritual and tradition helps people who may not have grown up in a rich ritual tradition understand why it's important. And so one of my beloved colleagues said, the old must be made new and the new must be made holy. Rav Kook, the first chief rabbi of the Israel Mandate. And so you're not allowed to really get rid of stuff, but you find new kavanah for doing what you've done. And some of that will evolve the tradition, but you don't just X off pages because, oh, that was then and this is now. So it's about a community gathering, community mix. And it's not something that the rabbi should ever mandate upon a community. It's something that we do as partners. Because if what I'm doing up here is irrelevant to the community, that's a problem. And so, so taking what Harriet said is we need to make sure that we continue to evolve, we continue to grow and meet the needs of the changing Jewish world, but never at the expense of making people feel that they're left out. So Harriet wasn't really a ritualist to begin with, and that's the rest of the story. She was a very classical Reform Jew, and she will tell you the story that sometime in the 1940s, Temple Adeth Israel in Lexington served ham at the Seder dinner. Now, there are a lot of people who were around then, and no one was there, but they all know the story. So when she says that to me, it's not because we're more Hebrew, less Hebrew. In fact, she didn't like Torah. There's more Torah. But it was just because it wasn't what she was accustomed to in that sense. But in doing that, we made sure that the accommodations, she liked the Hebrew. She, once every 2 months, I would take out the Old Union prayer book, which she loved, and we would do the old melodies that she loved for Harriet. Okay? But in major scope, the best answer is any evolution has to happen as a community, not away from the community or around the community. And it never should come into an us versus them in this. You know, as we welcome our growth, we also need to make sure that we know what our roots are. Okay, in short, that's the best answer. How it plays out, that's a matter of working through any ritual or any situation. But Rav Kook's words speak very loud to me. The old must be made new, and the new must be made holy. That doesn't mean undo the past. It means give new meaning. So one last example, in Lexington, the conservative rabbi and I decided that we should create a life cycle event for kids getting a driver's license. Okay? And so driver's licenses were not in the Talmud. Okay? But for his community, that would include going to mikveh specifically for change, that life change. Nobody at Temple Adeth Israel wanted to go to mikveh, or I would have facilitated that as well. But the idea of taking what's real and giving a Jewish ta'am, a Jewish value to it, is part of what you've grown up. This is who I am. My Judaism speaks how I pray and how I live. And we got to continue that message, even as we're in a different time. In the back.
Hi, my name is Bobby Landsman, and you just made a comment about a us and a them, and it's kind of a little bit the elephant in the room. I know so many people that are in here, and another part that hasn't been discussed is they're politically, because I'm finding so many issues between, I'm going to just say, the CNN camp and the Fox camp. And how do you handle things like that in the congregation? Because, there's always that liberal mentality of Judaism, but our whole country is pretty much split. And so how do you handle that in the congregation? Because I'm telling you, it's in here too.
Sometimes gingerly. No, and that's why for the last 5 years, I'm the chair of our Jewish Federation's Interreligious Committee, and everything I've done either through the synagogue or through Federation has been subtitled Return to Human. There should be a healthy disagreement on things political. I don't think the debate today is at all healthy. We live in a culture where if I disagree with you, you no longer matter as a human being, period. And so restoring the conversation to we don't have to agree to recognize the dignity that each other walks with in this world, I think is essential. That said, I've never shied away from provoking the conversation. Several years ago, I gave a sermon on Yom Kippur morning, and I started it by saying, now I'm about to say something that some of y'all are going to disagree with. Don't get up and leave. Don't take your donations somewhere else. Stay here and let's talk about it. Let this be the introduction to a conversation. And the sermon was on racism as a Jewish problem, something that we have to wrestle with. And after the service, several people came up to me and said, well, why did you apologize? I was on point. It was good. It was direct. And other people came up to me and said, it's a good thing you said what you did, or I gotten up and left. And so it really provoked a conversation in a congregation that has always called itself the Social Justice Congregation because it hired the first woman rabbi ordained. And that was ceiling breaking. There's no question. But when I got there, the most recent plaques on the wall for anything they did in the community were over 10 years old. And I'm an activist, and have always been an activist. But I need to make sure that everybody's around the table so that the activism that we work on is good for the community. And hopefully mind-changing for people on both sides so that we can learn the things that we don't want to learn about each other, but we really need to. So someone wrote a letter to the board accusing me of creating, get this, I created the myth of white privilege. Are y'all impressed? Okay. Accused me of creating that myth and imposing it on the synagogue, which prompted a conversation. And I said to the board, you knew what I have done. I co-led the march on Columbia, South Carolina with the now late Julian Bond in front of 50,000 people to take the flag down from the State House. I said, you know who I am, what I do, and that I work on building community across spectrums, but justice speaks loudly. And some of the people who were not completely sure said, you know what, there's a new way in which we have to see this world. And what came out of that board meeting was a commitment to a congregational mission on homelessness. And that's really what we've been known for as a community, both in terms of food insecurity, home insecurity, the fact that you can't vote if you don't have an address, school insecurity, kids who are taken to 3 or 4 different schools in one school year. Those are no longer politically partisan issues when you see it play out. When you can demonstrate to people how a minimum wage keeps you below the poverty line. It's not laziness, it's 40 hours a week, you're working hard, but at minimum wage, you're below the poverty line, and what that means in terms of the things that we take for granted about living. And you can transcend the politics because we dignify the person who's espousing the view, as opposed to saying, you and I disagree, and this synagogue is this. Good. So that's probably the best example I can give you, but it goes back to engagement. The more you get to know me, the more I'm going to use that word. I have a member who really doesn't agree with me on anything. And every week I was getting an email from him, I can't wait till you're not our rabbi anymore. So at one point, about 3 weeks went by, and I didn't get an email from him. So I called him. I said, are you okay? And he said, Well, yeah, why? And I said, I hadn't heard from you in 3 weeks. So after I announced that I was leaving, I got this lovely email from him that they're going to miss the conversations. He's going to actually miss. He says, I still don't agree with you. And by the way, here's 3 things from Fox News that you're going to love. Okay? But it's the interpersonal piece. So we don't have to agree on the politics. We do have to dignify that people feel strongly when they believe. You know, who was George Washington in the eyes of the British? He's a traitor and a terrorist. Now, you don't say that in America, okay? But that's the reality. People have perspectives, and nobody puts their life on the line on the battlefield without believing that the causes we're dying for, and our response to that is to call them the enemy. And they call us the same thing. And so there has to be a truth beyond what I think I know and what they think they know. That's more sacred. And so that's been how I address those things. Some people aren't willing to listen, on both sides of the aisle, by the way. I have people on the far left and the far right who will shut me down completely. But I've been pretty successful in helping creating meaningful and respectful conversation with the groups that are in between, just because of that.
Hi, Rabbi. My name is Les Sussman. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please, Les.
My name is Les Sussman. I've been here for a number of years. And I would be interested to hear about some of your recent accomplishments.
Well, that's loaded. Les, at the risk of asking you to narrow the question, on what field, or in what realm?
With your present congregation.
Okay. An easy one is creating a congregation that's mission-based as opposed to budget-based. Of recent, talking to the finance committee, asking them, where does our mission, where does our budget reflect our mission? If you're asking people to invest in this community, what in the budget that we send out are there reflections of what we do and why we need your investment? And that conversation's happened. We changed we wrote the bylaws to more broadly incorporate the broader community. Your bylaws, which respectfully are 12 years old, probably need to be looked at, already are very forward-thinking in that you've reserved specific positions for Jews, but not every position. Well, in the Northeast, adding non-Jews to your leadership team is like unheard of. And yet, like I said, 70% of my religious school is interreligious families. So immediately we changed the bylaws, and immediately our new finance chair is a man who's incredible in his acumen for mission-based giving and all that. Happens to not be Jewish, but loves this place, raised his sons at the synagogue, and was on the trip to Israel with Lori and I. And so that's one piece of it. The second piece that we did when we wrote the bylaws is we changed the vision and work of the board from a transaction-based board to a value and visioning-based board. How much time do we spend at board meetings hearing committee reports and arguing about the committee reports, and, by the way, doing committee work at the board meetings? And so if the committees function and report, and the people who are on the board commit to actually reading those reports, and where there's important things to share, talking about it, the board meeting can be about all the leaders talking, what do we need to be tomorrow? Where are we headed? Who are we, and does that match who we say we are? And at that point, the value of being a leader doesn't become a chore anymore. It really becomes a sacred engagement so that you are part of the future of the community. And it becomes easier to get people to say, oh, I'm willing to serve in a leadership capacity because I don't have to, by saying I'm going to be vice president or president, I don't have to give up 3 hours a month or whatever to a board meeting that I'm going to thank God it's over. Okay? There's also less stress in the community because you become a visionary community. It impacts everything. So I say to my board that said, this is not a business meeting. I said, you all are co-clergy because what you espouse, what you want, what you support, has more to say with what we as a community do Jewishly than anything I say from the pulpit. If you don't want to support something or you do want to push something, that's what we do. And so those are religious and faithful-based conversations. And by the way, the money's a piece of that. And by undoing the dues model, we have to provide people with a competent statement about what our mission is and how we execute it and the metrics that we've met in proving that it's successful. And you all know from the mailings that you get from nonprofits, they don't send you budgets, they send you the stories and the reasons to invest and to send a check. Well, when you do that, people who have been giving the amount you ask them to give end up giving more because it's more meaningful. Then you can also involve people who haven't been giving because what you're doing is meaningful. And if you get rid of the minimum that people have to worry about, then people who really can't afford much but want to serve and want to do end up becoming part of it. So that's been probably the greatest collective success. And by the way, one last piece of that is this year we're graduating our first ever senior class from high school. Kids who have decided to stay on post-confirmation, continue to study with me, teach in the school, and grow that engagement. So on Purim, I had to throw them out of the building actually after 3 hours because I had to get to another event on behalf of Rabbi Prezant. Okay? That's when you know that you're doing something right, when the kids love being there and want to continue. And again, that's part of the meaningful engagement that they now feel, as opposed to that's the religious school and this is the synagogue and you know, that whole conversation.
Yeah, sure. Hi, thank you for being here. I'm Daniel Klatzker. I'm also on the Board of Trustees. My wife Lauren and my father Barry behind me. My question for you is, you've shared your vast experiences with us. You're growing the temples and the communities that you've been a part of in various states. This is a relationship, right? Us with you, you with the congregation and the community. What is it about Temple Beth Tikvah in North Orange County that has drawn you to us? Why Temple Beth Tikvah from across the country?
Thanks. And that's the question that, of course, I've been asked a lot informally, but so thank you for making it direct. And I alluded to this earlier. I really have accomplished what I can where I'm at. And it involves people who are still currently there. The problem predates me by about, 15 years. And when you peel away the onions and you start fixing systems, you get left with a core of an issue. And people have to decide whether they want to deal with it or not. And for me to continue to push that would be to the detriment of the congregation. And the oath I swore is never to do that. I'm not going to work to destroy or help destroy something I work so hard to build, and that's good for the community. And so, that's why I'm looking. And that only happened very late. We only realized this very late in the game, and that's why I've not even been looking before this. That said, to, I guess, put the exclamation point, as challenging as this conversation has been for us, Tuesday night, they've asked me to, as consultant, have an exit interview with them on what I think the next steps need to be with a different voice. So the leaving is not, I'm not being booted out. It's just my voice can't take them to the next place. That's part one. Part two, I've served 3 communities, brought to each of them because systems needed to be healed or fixed or repaired or evolved. It's what I do as a consultant. I work with organizations, profit, nonprofit, houses of worship from different traditions. And so I came to do work in each of those 3, and I was successful, and we were successful, but they take a toll on you. And that's why I said earlier, the meeting that Lori and I had to come to grips with was, what do we want for the rest of our career? And I think I've got 7, 8 years. I think I can do this meaningfully until I'm 70. And I still play with the kids, and they keep me young. And and I have a seniors group that I don't call seniors. I call it Gathering of Wisdom. They think that's very cute, and it's one of the fun things that we do. But I want to be in a community for the rest of my career where I can take my skills and grow from where we are into something even better, as opposed to go in and have to start from here to get first up to a starting place. And it may be selfish of me at some level, but I just don't think I am best served. And if I represent anything about the rabbinate, I don't think the rabbinate is best served if my next place is another reclamation project that just burns me out at this point. I want to serve, and I want to love my community, and I want my wife and I to be in a place that thrives, that wants to love and grow, and that's starting from a good place. And what's happening here, what I've been able to see, and I know a little bit of history. One of my classmates served here before. So I know something about the history of this community. And I grew up in Anaheim. Well, my grandma was in Anaheim. But so the area, my mom is in Las Vegas. She is aging. She's still strong, thank God. But coming here makes it easier for me to be close to family. My mom, Lori and I both have cousins in this area. I have nobody up there. My closest is my son, daughter-in-law, now grandson Diogo in D.C. So the lifestyle here makes sense for us personally. The community and the way it engages makes a lot of sense for what I'm looking for to be able to spend meaningful years collaborating with and partnering with. And that's why. I'm sorry? Yeah, the weather's not bad either. Although I will tell you, when we moved from Lexington to New Jersey, people said, it snows in New Jersey. It's horrible up there. Our first year in New Jersey, it snowed 3 times in Lexington before it snowed in New Jersey. You look for signs from God, you know. So.
Hi, I'm Lauren Klatzker. I'm the wife, and I see my parents' names on the screen. So hi, Mom and Dad. We have 3 boys. Our oldest is a freshman in college. Our middle one is 16, and our youngest is 12. So he will be having a bar mitzvah within the next year. And 2 questions. The first one is, so I'm going to be a little bit long-winded, and I apologize. So last May, when the uprising was happening in Israel, our oldest son had a really bad experience at school. Still makes me a bit emotional, surprisingly. And we reached out to Rabbi Nico. Some really horrible things were said to him at school. Rabbi Nico wasn't available, but Rabbi Daniel was. I don't know if you've met Rabbi Daniel.
No, I have not yet.
He's the Orange County Hillel rabbi. I apologize.
And he's on his
also,
honeymoon right now.
I believe he is. He just got married. So we reached out to Rabbi Daniel, and Rabbi Daniel came to our home, met with my sons, and a couple of other kids in the community. They spent 3 hours and like 4 pizzas later sitting around our fire pit in our backyard, and they really processed everything. So a year later, our son applies to work at a URJ camp for the summer, and they ask him to write about a meaningful experience Jewishly. And his whole essay was not about his bar mitzvah. It wasn't about growing up at a temple. It was about sitting in our backyard with Rabbi Daniel. And for him, that was such a connection to Judaism in a way that nothing ever had been. He now started an SSI chapter at the University of Washington. Good. He works at Hillel. He's engaged as a Jew in a way that we actually were kind of surprised by, because he was very much the I don't believe in God kid. So my question, and I apologize for the story, but it kind of brings me to where I am, which is some of the connections that Rabbi Nico successfully built for our community was with people like Rabbi Daniel, with someone who, if you come here, you'll get to know Lisa Armoni at the Federation, who have brought opportunities and resources to our teens and our kids, which my kids have personally benefited from. So I'm curious about your openness to maintaining some of these relationships with outside agencies and other people who come to our temple to help serve our kids in our community. And also about just engagement with teens. We know teens they're a little salty, they're a little prickly, and they're not the easiest to engage Jewishly sometimes. And so I just would like to hear a little bit, as a parent of a 16-year-old and an upcoming bar mitzvah student, about your view on just engagement with that group in our community.
Thank you. And again, I appreciate the word engagement because I think that's the key word in all of this. First, in terms of resources, one of the smartest things I think I ever learned was that there's people with resources, skill sets, and tools that are way beyond me that I need for a community to thrive. And I learned that from Ray Kroc. Okay, Ray Kroc was the accountant for the McDonald's brothers who had 2 stores, who were going to close them because they were no longer wanting to be part of the business. And he saw something there, so he bought the name McDonald's from them. He knew nothing about hamburgers. He knew nothing about marketing. He was a numbers person. And yet he surrounded himself with the people that built the McDonald's empire. So early on, I know that we can only be successful if we bring in the variety of resources that make us more whole and grow us. So the people who are already listed here, absolutely, I would, and I'd want to know who they are in terms of what they see their own engagements before I start making any decisions about how best, because I don't know. I've always been one who has required bringing more resources into the community for that very reason, and that's why I've been involved in Federation. That's why I'm involved in all the different organizations, because they bring something to us that we could not have had otherwise that makes us more engaged or more whole. And by the way, also more relevant, I think, to our own people and to the wider community. The second piece, I was the recalcitrant teenager, okay? And there's a piece of me that still loves being in that mold. I love working with the high school kids. I teach confirmation, and again, this last couple of years I've also taught an 11th grade and a 12th grade class, something we never had kids. This graduating class did not want to take spring break from confirmation. They did not want to take summer break from confirmation. And I attribute that to the engagement, the way that they know that they mattered, the way that I was on top of the things that they were involved in, that when they came into class, whatever my lesson plan agenda took a second seat to stuff going on in their world, and somehow they loved the fact that I could always weave whatever they were talking about back into something Jewish. Okay? They are so impressionable, and at the same time scared because they're about to leave the safety net of parents' homes and embark on real world, whether it's to work or to school, and they need a place to feel safe in that quandary. They're starting to reach out with their own ideas. Teenagers are starting to have ideas different from their parents. None of you have ever experienced that, right? And they need to know that there's a place they can express them and can work through them, so that when they do speak with their parents, it's a more educated conversation. One of the favorite things that I do is take the kids to DC. It's been easier, obviously on the East Coast, but for the Letakane program that the Religious Action Center puts on, and I've been to 15 and missed the last 2 because they didn't exist because of COVID. But the bonding opportunity there, and when 16-year-olds are sitting in the congressperson's office or the senator's office and reading to the staff something that they wrote about some current piece of pending legislation, it is so empowering to them. And then you help them understand that at their age, they have a voice. My teens have always loved me, and I don't mean to say that out of ego, but my teens have always loved me because I have always absolutely loved my teens. Confirmation is a blessing and a challenge because another class will take that time, but they know that no one takes their place. Okay? And that's been on the harsh issues and the fun issues as well. I had to deal with teens over all of these same issues, some of whom have friends who are Muslim. And the interplay between friendships has been challenging. And because I'm involved in the Muslim world fairly deeply, I can bring in people from the mosques to help have part of these conversations with them as well. Please.
Yeah, thank you. She's readjusted this. She'd like to know the weaknesses that you have as a rabbi, from Linda.
Ask my wife. No, right up front, I will share with you that I am calendar challenged. I can create a ton of work. I can get a ton of things done, but for some reason, dotting the I's in a calendar, I need some help with someone telling me what I'm supposed to be doing and when I'm supposed to be doing it. I'm getting better, but that's right there. And part of it is, this is early in the engagement to share, I have a non-diagnosed attention deficit. Non-diagnosed because I've never been treated medically for it, but I know it's there, and it actually manifested in my sophomore year of college when I overdosed on Quaaludes and woke up scared straight. And realized at that point that I had to figure out how to not just exist with this, but how to channel it. And so when I teach, I can be all over the place. And it's good, it's engaging, but that's very real for me. I'm a workaholic. I do not understand sometimes the separation of downtime and not, and that's probably one of Lori's greatest frustrations with me. And so, and I'm passionate, never to the point where I will say someone doesn't matter, but there are times if I really deeply, deeply believe in something strongly, you're going to know how deeply I believe in it. That doesn't mean I'm intractable. That doesn't mean it's a mandate one way or the other, but you'll know how I feel. But it's transparent as well.
Thank you. And one more. Has social action or tikkun olam replaced worship and prayer? Is there room for both? Is there time for both?
I don't know if this person who asked that has been following me, but I've been dealing with that a lot lately. The Reform movement, especially the Reform movement, I would argue parts of the conservative movement as well, have become, my Jewishness is because I'm on the front lines doing stuff. And I express my appreciation because I'm on the front lines doing stuff. And so oftentimes, I'm on the front lines doing stuff because the rabbi told me to be there. And so I love my rabbi, I love my congregation, I'm going to be there. But why are you there? Well, because the rabbi told me to do it. And while social action, social justice, tikkun olam, however you want to call it, was supposed to be a byproduct of a faithful engagement, it has in so many cases become the engagement. So if you go back to the value of prayer, prayer is the prelude. We pray before we do things. And there's a reason for that. Because you pray with intention, this is what I'm about to do, and then you do it with more intentionality and dignity than you might have done it just walking through it. So you say motzi before a meal, so that not just you're going to enjoy the meal, but so that you will appreciate the value of sustenance, and that something, if it's an animal, gave its life, and you don't want to cheat that. You want to make sure that you do good things with the sustenance. We say Birkat Hamazon afterwards. That's not just a thank you for eating. It's now that I've eaten, and now that I am full and I got what I wanted, I need to remember that I'm supposed to do something with this. So when you pray for peace as part of the liturgy, you don't say the words, you say, okay, God, I prayed. You have to then go do something. Those words of prayer are supposed to change who you are. Abraham Joshua Heschel said, prayer should be subversive. It needs to undercut the complacency and callousness with which we walk through this world, so that when you pray for something, you are committed to go making it happen. So social justice is supposed to be a byproduct of prayer and worship. It's supposed to be the result of what we do because as a community or as a person, I've prayed, I've committed to doing something. And as Heschel said, you haven't fulfilled that prayer until you've done it. So when he was arrested after marching with Dr. King, his statement is, my legs were praying. He was praying for peace. He was praying for justice. Well, that didn't happen because he said the words. It happened because he went out and did something. So the best answer I can give is they should never be separate. One is supposed to be an intimate part of the other. And if you say the words and then you don't do the act, it's a bracha levatala, a prayer without value. So, okay.
Hi, Rabbi. My name is Greg Spalter. This is my wife, Denise.
Pleasure.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate all the discussion on the engagement, activism in the community, in the world, all very important. But when you get down to it, especially the age of all of this and how long we've been involved, to me, the most important things are the services and how you deal with the ill and all that, the day-to-day stuff. Can you describe a little bit about the services? How often, do you do Friday nights starting at 7, or you don't do Friday night, or Saturday night, or what your vision of services and what's involved? And then also, I guess, your prioritization of dealing with the sick and calling on families when needed.
The second part is more concrete, and I'll answer that first. When I was at Hebrew Union College, I served 3 years as chaplain at a Jewish nursing home. And I learned a ton about what the important piece of ministry was in that role, taking care of people, and not just the person who was ill, but the family who was caring for someone, or the families who were grieving loss. I served on a hospital chaplaincy board in South Carolina. In Lexington, Kentucky, I created the police chaplaincy team, and I served as chair of the hospital chaplaincy board for a Catholic hospital. And where I'm at now, I've created the police chaplaincy team in Red Bank, New Jersey, and for the prosecutor's office, and am the rabbinic chaplain for Hackensack Meridian Hospital System. So when it comes to taking care of people in their need, whether it's physical, emotional, spiritual, at any of those levels, that's sacred work, because that's what relationships are supposed to be about. There's a story. 2 guys are in a bar and they're a little drunk, and one guy says, "I love you." The other guy says, "No, you don't love me." "Of course I love you." "No, you don't love me." "I love you." "You don't love me." "Why do you say I don't love you?" "Because if you love me, you know it hurts me." And so it's that empathy of being able to understand what people need and responding to it that is the sacred work here, more important than anything else. As to services, I have seen some of the variety of services. You've got them stored on a website, and I will see that. I don't sing. In fact, you don't want me to sing. In fact, my cantor has told me on the pulpit that when I sing, it gives her job security. The musical instrument I play is the stereo. I can almost clap on key, okay? So that said, music is sacred. Heschel says that music is the prayer of the soul. I am blessed to have very close relationships with some of the people who wrote the music that we use in liturgy. So in terms of the worship experience, my background thus far has been Friday nights with Saturdays when there has either been a special event or a bar bat mitzvah. Am I married to that? Absolutely not. I serve the congregation. There's lots of things that I don't necessarily agree with in ritual, but it's not my congregation. So, and I'll just share one with you, and I hope it doesn't upset people, but I think that parading a Torah around is somewhat idolatrous, personally. I make sure it's done every week because that's what my congregation wants, and I do it with full dignity. And people don't have to agree with me because it's not my Torah, it's ours, and I'm in charge of making sure that people get to experience what people need in that sacred moment. And so that's the way I approach worship. So if we have traditions here that are sacred, we'll continue to evolve them and grow them because that's what happens over time. Will there be things that I'm more or less comfortable with? I don't know because I don't know that yet, but I'm blessed to be with the community. If you ask me how I am, I think I shared this, I'm blessed every day. I'm blessed to be with communities that want me to be relevant. And so I think in any situation, we've all been involved in things where we are blessed to be in that moment, even if we don't agree with everything that happened there. Okay? I'm no different in that place. All right? So worship should happen. It should happen with some creativity in terms of engagement. It should be appropriate to settings for holidays or for involving different facets of the community. We live near the ocean right now, so twice during the summer we would take the whole synagogue and go out and do services on the ocean, which was really kind of nice. You know, we have outdoor grounds here. I'm sure that you do worship outside here sometimes. So I don't believe that it should be the same in every setting, but I believe it should be the same kavanah in every setting. And that is something that you will determine and help me learn and understand if I'm competent to serve you. Okay, because it's not about me.
Hi, my name is Jerry Levine. My wife happens to be here as well, if anybody, Victoria, in case she cares. After all, you've answered most of my questions, so I feel you deserve at least one softball question, which doesn't involve, you know, enormous amounts of theory and can be riven with controversy, but it is kind of important. We have actually a very, what I think is a very active Tanakh study group every Saturday morning before services. Ever since I've been here, that's been led by lay people from the congregation. I know many temples, it's the clergy that leads that study. Do you have any strong views about the appropriateness of that, or you feel if it ain't broke, it should be allowed, you know, don't fix it? And then I have one quick comment that I'd like to make after I hear your answer.
Okay, and I hope that the answer will breed the good comment, but for me it's always about empowerment in that engagement, and when people take ownership of their synagogue, we all win. When we rely on the paid staff, which includes clergy, to do everything, I think there's something that we lose because we're no longer vested or invested in owning and taking care of our home. So for study, my experience has been defaulted that I come in there wanting to participate, and I don't want this to be the reality, but in many cases it's become, okay, well, Rabbi, what's next? And I always keep saying, well, you tell me what's next, even from the standpoint of what we're going to study. Because I would love to be a participant in and not necessarily the leader of. And I don't think it's a matter of accommodating, and I don't think it's a matter of it's not broke, don't fix it. I think it's the right answer for the community when members of the community remember that Rabbi is a teacher, which also means a student, and not the paid professional in every setting.
I'd like to make one last quick comment, if I may. It's been my experience that job interviews, I learned one day, are a two-way street. They're not just an opportunity for the employer to meet the employee, but it's an opportunity for the employee to meet their potential employer. And in that regard, I'd like to make one comment for you if you come here. I've been a member now for 42 years. Except for one very, very brief period of time about 20 years ago, I have found that the congregation and its leadership has never been involved in rivalries or really violent disagreements. We disagree, of course, we're Jews. But
5 Jews, 7 opinions.
Yeah, but civility and respect for other views has always been a tradition in this congregation, and I don't see that changing regardless of who comes in. It would take a very powerful leader to change her attitude on that, and I don't think that would happen. But I can tell, I think that may be something that you should be aware. That's at least my observation from 42 years as a member.
And I appreciate that, and that's been my sense from the conversations that I've had. You know, sometimes you don't have to ask the questions, and you get to observe how people interact, and that's absolutely been the experience that I've thus far been able to share. And so thank you for that affirmation.
Hi, my name's Iris Shapiro. I'm married to this wonderful man over here for 47 years.
God
He's on
bless
the
you.
nominating committee. Anyway, I appreciate your discussion around diversity and relationships. I totally relate to that. Can you speak a little bit to your philosophy on engagement in terms of in-person as well as this new virtual world? And tell me how you practice around that?
Um,
Out, by the way.
Thank you. And thank you for your patience with the hand up for a long time before they called on you. The last 2 years have really been challenging. We've had to completely reinvent synagogue life. And I'm not completely sure what path it's going to take moving forward. Someone said to me, I'm looking forward to Yom Kippur, but I really liked being able to watch Yom Kippur in my pajamas. So we've been live streaming for 7 years, so that wasn't a new thing for us. And you're using Zoom, we used a one-way live stream, so I can't see people in their pajamas, okay? And so I made the statement, well, come in your pajamas. We'd love to have you here, So there is nothing that beats being in person with people. Even on Zoom, which has been a great tool, and we can see people's faces and their reactions, we can only see faces and reactions, and we don't know what other things are distracting in their world. And one of the problems we've experienced with Zoom nationally is it keeps crashing because so many organizations are using it. So it's a great tool, a wonderful tool, but it does not and can't replace the in-person. That said, there are people who can be involved in our community that never could have been involved before. And that's a wonderful thing. So I was telling some folks before we got started that 2 years ago, we had 4,088 hits on Yom Kippur morning. I don't know if they stayed 5 minutes or they watched the entire service, but that's 4,088 people who watched some piece of our Yom Kippur morning service. That's not something that you could have ever accommodated before. We have people at our Torah study from Montreal and from Lexington, Kentucky. They can't be involved if it's only in person. When my Tuesday group of wisdom, gathering of wisdom, was in person, we had 25. When we went to, that was on Zoom, we had 25, but 4 or 5 were different. People who could never have come in, but now could participate, and then the people who dropped, I don't want to do computer stuff. So we're making the decision to come back together. Well, I can't drop the virtual piece of it for people who've now gotten involved. So like you have here, you have a room full of people, but you also have to accommodate all of the other people in a meaningful way. And you can't do that on just a small computer screen. You've got big screens so you can actually see people's faces. As opposed to there's a pixel in there that I think someone moved on. And it's a brave new world. And I'm not sure how it's going to play out. At the same time, we want to come back safely. Lori is medical research coordinator, and she specializes in thoracic oncology, and she's great at it, well respected, but when COVID happened, they took her off of that, and she coordinated COVID research for the hospital system. And the stories that she experienced and that I went through were just horrific. So there are people that are still not willing to come back out of fear, never mind the people who are too comfortable to not come back, but out of real fear. One of the most loving women in the world, my wife, is not yet comfortable shaking hands because there's some PTSD that she's had to deal with because of what she's experienced in her role as researcher. And so when we're trying to build community and build interpersonal capacity, these are some real challenges that we as a community have to face. And maybe that means more outside time or changing the air conditioning systems and expense goes into that. But what will it take? And I'm not a prophet, I can't tell you that. But it is probably one of the most significant challenges. That said, if you continue to do the work in the community, we grew 42 families over COVID not because of the sanctuary or any meeting space, because what's happening is people want an engagement with a community that matters. And we are still that. We were still volunteering. Our garden was still producing. So there's that new way of approaching how people will be looking at our synagogue as well, and not from the traditional ways. You need a bar mitzvah, you need a bat mitzvah, or whatever. So it's opened up a whole new conversation for prophetic thought for communities.
I have one last one from our Zoom. As a humanist, do you start with the premise that Torah is true, or are values universal?
I love this question because there's lots of sermons here. There's a semester or two of courses on this one. But I want to dignify probably one of the most important questions that's been asked today, because we all come from different theologic places. And none of us really know what God is or could agree with each other. And if I were to ask everybody here to do some depiction or description of your relationship with God, you would wonder if anybody was really in the same community together, okay? And that begins with, is there God? And, you know, God is a job description. Really. I mean, when Moses says it's at the burning bush, who shall I say sends me? God says, tell him I am. Not I am George, or I am Susie, or I am in love with corned beef. Okay? Just tell him that I exist. Now, what does that mean? And in the Jewish spectrum, there's a book, Finding God, by Rifat Sansino, one of my colleagues, where he details 16 or 17 different concepts of what God is in a Jewish context. Okay, not how we relate, but what God is. So if God is the collective idea of everything that's moral and ethical combined into one being, which would be a very humanist perspective, great. You know, is God the old man who plays chess on the playing field and we're the pawns or whatever? Some people believe that. You know, okay. But that's what's really so important about the diversity within our conversation, is that we start with the presumption that we are all on a different page of what theology is, but on the same page that there is something beyond the me. Because when I go to sleep at night, I'm not in control of what happens. And I go to sleep with full trust that there'll be a tomorrow that I don't have anything to say in. What causes it? I don't know. I have my beliefs, but people hold that differently. And that's okay. So in terms of the Jewish spectrum of humanism versus a devout, all-consuming God is omni-everything, you know, it's all at home it should be at home in a synagogue family. As to Torah is true, I'm going to start by being provocative and saying absolutely yes. Now, Aesop's fables. There was never a race between a tortoise and a hare, right? But is there truth? Slow and steady wins the race. Absolutely. Okay? There was a civil war in the United States. According to the North, wrongly, it was about freeing slavery. Why? Because the Emancipation Proclamation ended slavery in the South, not in the North. That's a whole nother conversation. But according to the South, it was about states' rights. Who's right? They're both right. Okay, so truth is not necessarily the same as fact. 2 plus 2 equals 4. 2 plus 2 equals 22. 2 plus 2 equals 0. 2 apples and 2 bananas equal how many oranges? Okay, so 2 plus 2 equals 4 is an answer we've all been told is the right answer, and if you put anything other than that down on a school standardized test, it's marked wrong. There's no room for you to be able to say there's a different understanding of this. And so with Torah, you don't have enough facts in any storyline to create a whole biography of an individual or the full dealings of the entire episode. You have enough to create a conversation. And the conversation is going to change community to community, religion to religion, era to era. And all of them meet the needs within that group. And the magic of Torah is that it allows for all of that diverse conversation. The truth is that it requires us to converse meaningfully as a community. They're not facts. I mean, there are 4 different creation stories in the first 6 chapters of Genesis. Which one's the right one? I would argue that the redactors are arguing from the very beginning, folks, this isn't a history. Don't read it as a history. Let's deal with the conversations that it provokes. So I do believe that truth begins with, am I willing to have a meaningful conversation with my community, my heart and my soul, over what's sacred for us as a community? And Torah begins that conversation. And in that, it is truth. Torah emet, it is truth. But I don't know that it's fact. And candidly, if you can prove to me tomorrow that there was a Moses or there wasn't a Moses, it doesn't change who I am and what I do today. So for me, and I think for us in modernity, and probably the rabbis of old, given the commentaries, what's sacred about Torah in its truth is that it doesn't change, but it's usable relevantly how we need to use it in every different setting. So I hope that answers the question.
It does. And we've come to the end of our time.
Thank you all.
I'm not sure, hold on. I'm not sure you're aware of this, but 3 miracles occurred today. 3. The first miracle is that my daughter Melissa only asked 1 question. The second miracle is that we've been here for 2 hours and not one person in this room fell asleep.
Except my wife, no.
And the third miracle is that we've been here for 2 hours and there's still food in the social hall.
Wait, I thought I was coming to a Jewish community. You know?
So I know you'll take care of that before you leave the congregation today. Thank you for coming, and let's say
thank you, everybody.
Thank you to Rabbi.
One last thing. My very favorite prayer in our tradition, and I started using it when my kids were very little. And they got accustomed to, whenever something new came their way, whether it was falling down the stairs or whatever, the first time they came. And it's the prayer that says, thank you, God, for creating us, sustaining us, and giving us an opportunity to share in these moments. So if you'll join me, please. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, she'echianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. Amen. Thank you all. Thank you.